There are still mixed reactions to Tulsi Gabbard's entrance into the race, with many people not knowing who she is or not hearing about her in the news, others very much appreciating her in the race, others thinking that she's the person that has the best chance to win the race, and yet some others who think that either she's right-wing or something, but boils down to she doesn't belong and she's not a good, forthright figure. Well, it's days like these where the drums of war thunder once again, and the world is moved towards another conflict, that someone like Tulsi Gabbard is the right person at the right time to talk about the right things to the right people. Now, of course, she doesn't get on MSN. She barely gets on CNN. She only is able to really pull an audience on Fox because they're the only people that let her on mainstream media. But she had a very interesting and frighteningly important discussion on Fox News. So let's take a look and break it down piece by piece.
Hawaii Congresswoman and 2020 presidential contender, Democrat Tulsi Gabbard. Nice to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Shannon. Great to be here.
Okay, so let's talk about the Wall Street Journal quoting a senior defense official says this is a case where credible intelligence drove measured, appropriate operations.
I just want to make the point that whenever you hear an anonymous quote from someone in that context, we saw what happened with anonymous quotes in the Iraq War. I don't trust it. It's not a good thing to trust someone anonymously talking about something like this.
You to be briefed next week. Are you confident that the administration is taking measures in line with what they actually know?
I'm looking forward to getting that briefing. I can tell you as a soldier, I serve in the Army National Guard. I've been serving for over 16 years. I've deployed twice to the Middle East, and in Congress have served over 6 years on both the House Foreign Affairs and the Armed Services Committees. And I know two things very well. First is the high human cost of war. You know, these wars across the Middle East and Iraq, thousands of my brothers and sisters in uniform lost their lives, many more injured. And I also know the cost on the American people. You know, the trillions of dollars that we've spent since 9/11 alone on waging these wasteful regime change wars, how those wars have undermined our national security and how they have strengthened terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, she's not kidding. She literally introduced a bill into Congress so that we would stop arming terrorists because we arm and fund terrorists like Al-Qaeda who are supposed to be fighting, even though we created them when we wanted to fight the Russians in the Cold War. It was the Russians' version of Vietnam was funded by us. It was Afghanistan, and it was the people that we are fighting right now.
How those wars have undermined our national security and how they have strengthened terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So when we talk about a potential war with Iran, which is looking like we are walking very dangerously down that path, what I think is important for the American people to know is that a war with Iran would make the war in Iraq look like a cakewalk. The devastation and the cost would be far greater than anything we've ever experienced before.
Let's talk about that. When we invaded Iraq, Saddam didn't think we were actually going to invade. When we invaded Libya, he didn't think that we were actually going to invade. All the places that we have invaded in recent history have been small countries with various sized armies that were completely unprepared or not mobilized for an invasion. Iran has been preparing for an invasion for decades. They have over 1 million, they have one of the largest ground armies on the planet, over 1 million men. They've been putting time and resources into development of technology and defenses. They've watched every time the U.S. has invaded and toppled a government, and they've taken notes every step of the way. We know that there's really only one way that they can be invaded from, and that is from Saudi Arabia crossing the strait. It would be a bit odd to try and go over 400 miles of desert, even with modern machinery. They have modern anti-air defenses. They have the ability to put a tanker into the straits that border each side of Yemen and just knock out 25% of the oil that's coming in and out of the planet because it's Saudi Arabia. We know that the Saudis are having a very hard time, even though they're massacring the Yemenis. They don't have the greatest war front, so the strength, even though we're giving them a ton of stuff, they need American assistance to really be anywhere near effective, the Iranians are going to have a much easier time buying surplus or second generation material, war material, tanks, what have you, from both Russia and China. Russia and China, of course, will also be watching it and gaining insight into how the American military machine works. I would expect that if there was a war, that we would just happen to have, 100,000 civilians from Russia who happen to have paramilitary experience, and 100,000 civilians from China and Russia that just so happen to have paramilitary experience helping Iran out, since they are allies of Russia and China. Now, do I think that America will not be able to topple Iran? No, America will. Americans are used to quagmire wars where just the civilians are killed, where we don't lose that many troops. As an example, more Americans were killed on D-Day than all of Afghanistan. And I think we're not going to be as lucky with Iran. They're prepared, they have money, they know how we take out command and control, they've dealt with that appropriately. They have a massive army. They have defenses that have been prepared for a very long time. They have the supplies and support that they're going to get from China and Russia. And then on top of all of this is all happening, for me, it was it was the path that we were going to go down was when Trump, the very day that Trump canceled the Iran deal, is the day at which I accepted that we were probably going to be going to war with Iran within a few years. So what is America going to do? It's going to try to get a coalition effort. We've pissed off and isolated ourselves from the world, so maybe we'll get NATO to help us. Maybe we won't. We probably will, but I don't know. The U.S. is just not going to have the support it did when it toppled Saddam. That's for sure. The American people aren't going to be happy. We're probably going to be attacked within America for the first time in a long time. That's what Iran has set up. So when Tulsi Gabbard says that it's not going to be a cakewalk, she's not kidding. And I don't hear this from anyone else. I don't hear Bernie Sanders talking about this what we're walking into. Blindfold. We're walking towards a cliff. And again, I'm not worried that the U.S. is going to fail, but I think it will turn out to be a turning point in American history where people will probably look back on it as this was the definitive moment that the American empire began to fall apart. And Tulsi's the only one out there who's making the point to make this point. I wish Sanders would. I wish other people would. But I gotta respect her because she is.
The president said today when he was asked point blank, are we heading to war with Iran? He says, I hope not. Yeah. Secretary Pompeo has said that's absolutely the opposite of what we want.
They were saying that after Europe was like, what are you guys doing? And now they're saying, oh, we don't want it, we don't want it. After they've moved 120,000 troops to the border, after tearing up the Iran deal, the deal which in terms said Iran will not develop a nuclear program, the U.S. will withdraw the sanctions that it already has on Iran, it will release the money which it has taken from Iran and frozen in assets, which we're also doing to Venezuela right now, and the U.S. will not impose any additional sanctions on Iran. What is the Trump administration doing? Putting more sanctions on Iran, trying to cut out them from the banking and oil market, which it's a huge part of their economy. So Iran's saying, well, if you're going to do that, which is literally the reason we're not going to be developing nuclear material, well, why don't we just do that? Because you're clearly planning to invade us. And so then the U.S. is going to go, oh, look, they're building up nuclear material, or they're threatening to build up nuclear material or something. And then we're going to have some document that's going to pop up and say, look, they have weapons of mass destruction, or they're making them full repeat of the last invasion. Then the U.S. goes in to the slaughter. And Iran has 80 million people. It's 4 times as big as Iraq by territory size. Much stronger economy. And again, it's like a quarter the size of America. It's not going to be what it was in these other countries. Short of a global power, Iran is the strongest country that you can invade. This is not going to be what everyone thinks it's going to be. It's going to be probably the first war where we lose jet fighters in combat, which we don't.
There's a lot of talk about the fact that the president has been telling his aides, I don't want this to escalate. This is absolutely not something we want to get into. You know, during the campaign, he talked all the time about getting us out of places. He does not want to be somebody who gets into foreign incursions that we don't need to. But today, this is what Senator says on the Senate floor. He described the situation as serious and potentially imminent threat to U.S. forces and said the Trump administration is right.
If given the option, Marco Rubio would invade Cuba. Guy hasn't suffered a day in his life.
To reposition military assets and be in a position to retaliate should Iran lash out at U.S. interests in Iraq or the Middle East. So knowing that the president was so dead set against these kinds of things, does it convince you now that he's seen something significant to change his mind?
Well, I think I would look at 2 things. First of all, as a soldier, I understand the need for us to be prepared, and I understand the need for us to keep the American people safe, to put our national security at the forefront. What's concerning to me is that while Trump and others in his administration are saying that they don't want to go to war with Iran, I hear them saying that more now that they're getting a lot of pushback from our allies, like those in the UK, when in fact the actions that the administration has been taking are telling us another story. That it's.
I'd like to see Russia put 200 troops on the border with Mexico on the Mexican side and have America go, no issue at all. Yet when we put 120,000 troops on the border of a country who we are antagonizing, economically sanctioning, and many other things, and on top of all that, we did overthrow their democratically elected country many decades ago to get oil, why are they expecting Iran to act in a way that the U.S. would never act in the exact same circumstance? It's disgusting. It's not how things work. It's how you do propaganda.
It's actually pushing us closer and closer to the prospect of a war with Iran. This is what I'm very concerned about, because I know that cost on our troops, on the American people, on civilians across the Middle East and the region, creating more refugees, creating more instability in Europe. I mean, the cost would be very great. They have not presented that evidence to Congress yet. So,
and you'll get a briefing next week.
We look forward to getting that information and considering it very carefully.
We have some brand new polls today. You're running for the presidency. Fox News poll has you in 11th.
Nope, don't really care about polls. This is much more important. I worry about the fate of this country and what happens to the empire and the nation that exists as the U.S. I've said on the show multiple times, we have 2 ways of exiting the role of an empire, because every empire will fall. We can either choose our own path, spread out our power to other countries, have to actually negotiate, not just force ourselves, deals and bargains with South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia. But we can still be on the top of that more wide pyramid. Or we can degrade ourselves to the point where it won't be our choice at all. And on that note, I want to leave you guys with a little video.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. The truth is about the Middle East is, had there been no oil there, it would be like Africa. Nobody is threatening to intervene in Africa. The problem is the opposite. We keep asking for people to intervene and stop it. And there's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement. Whether that was the specific motivation for the coup or not, I can't tell you, but there's always been this attitude that somehow we could intervene and use force in the region.
We as civilians can't control the foreign policy of the U.S. That is basically the domain of the president. So, in the upcoming election, remember what is at stake and what that means to elect a president. Now, I've made my position clear that I like Bernie, but I wish he would talk like Tulsi did on foreign policy. I wish other presidents would. At least Bernie put in the effort of saying, I'm looking into foreign policy. Look at all the neocons out there. Look at Biden. Do you think Biden is going to make a dramatic change in the situation from what is now? Do you think Hillary Clinton would have been that much different? Do you think that Pete Buttigieg would be that different? Do you think Beto O'Rourke, who gets all his money from oil, would be better than Donald Trump in the Middle East? Presidents matter. And our voice, even in this flawed system, is relevant. It's not enough to vote, but not voting is a mistake. We all need to work together to build a better future. But the only way we're going to do that in this system is to make sure that the wrong people don't get in office and the right people are allied and working together. I would love to see Tulsi Gabbard as Secretary of State. I want to see her in a very important position. Even if it's president, I would be more than happy if she did win. Because she is out there fighting, has fought for the country in the military, and saw the truth, saw why we're actually out there, saw what we're actually doing, came back and put everything on the line to say, I'm going to fight against it. And that takes so much, and we have so few that will. So I still think that Tulsi is a long shot, but her voice is as essential as anyone else and needs to be heard, because she's the only one who is constantly saying this is wrong. Guys, this is Perspective. See you guys on Saturday.